Hello everyone. I hope you're doing well. I hope no one's sick, you or the family. Anyhow, I had been thinking about doing this video for a long time, and I didn't do it because I really wasn't sure who would want to watch this, who would, care to watch it. But I guess after a while I just figured, well, if somehow it could help someone, then I'm okay with that. Then yeah, it's definitely worth putting the video out there. So anyhow, this is a testimony, my testimony of the second worst year of my life. If you've been watching me for the last couple of years, you probably know that the first worst year of my life was when my husband died very unexpectedly. Less than a year after we had started living our dream of living in an off-grid cabin. So yeah, that was the worst. This one comes in, a really close second. So to start it off, it starts off with my mom being diagnosed with cancer. And I've talked about that, a few different times here on the channel. So I won't get into, too many details with that. But when I first heard, I got a phone call, a two-way call with both my mom and my sister on the phone. And I was out having dinner with my best friend. And so in fact, I didn't get the call when we were still in the restaurant. It wasn't until we were out in the car because I couldn't hear it. My phone was in my purse. So, and they said cancer. And I gotta tell you, at first, not only was I not shocked, but I wasn't really, afraid or whatever. Because my mom had had cervical cancer when she was 31. And then just a couple of years prior to this, she had skin cancer. She had several of these lesions, whatever, taken off. And so I guess in the back of my mind, that's what I was thinking. It's like, well, mom gets cancer, but she beats it. It's never a huge ordeal or anything. And long story short, that wasn't happening this go around. They couldn't figure out initially what kind of cancer it was, nor did they know the stage. And they had to do specific testing for that, and my mom refused to get that done until after, this was when she first found out the cancer was early to mid-November. At that time she lived 2 hours away. She came back to the Milwaukee area and stayed, her and my dad stayed with me and Paul, and she wouldn't get the testing or the surgery. They needed to do surgery until after Christmas. So during that time, my girlfriend, the one who I had been out to dinner with, we had made plans. She was going to come over to make Christmas cookies. And this was, I'd say, probably a couple weeks before Christmas, and she didn't show. And that wasn't necessarily a big deal because I hadn't talked to her for about 4 or 5 days, and I just figured, maybe she had to work. She was a banquet server, and so at any given time she would pick up extra shifts. So I kind of figured that's what it was, or she forgot, or whatever. It wasn't that big of a deal. So I called her a day or two later, wanting to see if she wanted to reschedule. And she didn't answer. So I left her a message. and she didn't get back to me. So I'd say about 3 days after that, I called her again and left a message. And Christmas came and went, and I never heard from her, which was really starting to bother me at the time, because she knew, I was going through a bunch of stress with my mom and everything, and so I just didn't get it. Anyhow, yeah, we found out my mom's cancer was stage 4, but they still didn't know what kind it was. And in fact, when she died, they still didn't know what kind it was. So very few cancer patients get that. She had cancer all over her body, basically. And so from diagnosis to death was 5 months. And she went through a lot of chemo and things like that. And so during this time, my best friend of 28 years, we had met and were instant friends when we were 12. And she was more like a sister to me, because we did everything together. We even had our kids together, and just, yeah. So the one thing with her, though, over the years was if she was mad at you, she would give you the silent treatment. And she thought somehow you should know why she was mad. And so I sat there racking my brain. I'm like, I don't think I did anything. And so I called her again, and I'm like, I'm really sorry if I did something. Will you please call me back? I could really use a friend. And then eventually I sent her cards and letters, and I never did hear back from her. Didn't know why. But also, during this time, my ex-husband, the one who was father to my youngest son, Jeremy, decided this would be a swell time to take me back to court for full custody. He told me, I know your mom's dying and everything, and I'm sorry, but I just got to do what I think is right. I couldn't believe it. When his mom died, was dying, because she was in and out of the hospital quite a bit the last 6 months of her life, I was very accommodating, and I felt really bad for him, and it was just not a good scene. And to think that he would pick this time to do something like that, okay, that just really added a little bit more to my stress. And then the last big stressor going on during this time was I had 3 sons in the military. The twins, Jacob and Jason, were both Marines, and they were in, I think it's North Carolina where they were stationed, Camp Lejeune and Cherry Point. And then my son Joe was Army National Guard, and he had been called up, and so he did some training, a couple of weeks training here in state, and then was going to go down to El Paso for a month for training there, and also to acclimate. And I knew this all was coming up, with Joe going to Iraq, and I knew the twins were scheduled somewhere down the line to go to Afghanistan. And so, yeah, I was just, stressing out and trying to do the best that I could. But then came the day that it was the last day of my mom's life. And if you've ever been with anyone who's been sick, and this is their last day, you'll know that most often dying doesn't come quick. And it's not always peaceful either. And this was the case with my mom. So by this time she was living with my sister, and I had planned on going over there. It was a Sunday, the end of April. But my sister called me almost right before I left the house and said she knew this was the day. And so I got to my sister's house around noon. My mom didn't pass until like 20 after 4 in the morning the next day. And we had a lot of family coming. My mom was very much loved, and she wasn't that old. She was 59, just turned 59. And a lot of people were coming and going. And that night at 7:30, I got a phone call from Jason. And he was deploying the next morning at 7 a.m. He was going to Afghanistan. And I just lost it. I just was crying and crying. And there was nothing we could do about it. He couldn't come home for the funeral. And I don't know, I think because of what was going on with my mom, I don't think I really said things to him maybe I should have. My mind was just all over the place. So, anyhow, my mom passed away that Monday. And the next day, on Tuesday, I went to buy her clothes for her burial because she had lost so much weight, nothing fit her. And it was when I was in Kohl's, that's where I was. Joe called, and he said he didn't know which day, but he was pretty confident he was deploying in the next couple of days. And so I talked to him for a while. It was really, really good talk. And of course I didn't like it, but you know. And then I got word that Jacob, the other twin, the other Marine who was supposed to deploy to Afghanistan, his deployment was being pushed back by about 3 weeks. So they were going to let him come home. So I was pretty happy about that. It would be good to see him and, you know, have as many of the kids as possible be home for that. Anyhow, that Thursday, was it Thursday, Friday? I don't remember. It was when my mom was being laid out, and Jeremy was sick, and he told me he was by his dad's, and he told me that he had thrown up and he wasn't feeling good. And I said, Jer, stay home then, because at that time swine flu was going around. And I was just like, you know, you don't want to infect other people, this and that. And he's like, no, Mom, I have to come. I'm starting to feel better and this and that. And he was really close to my mom. So I eventually agreed. And his dad was going to drop him off at my house. And one of my older sons was going to drive him because I had to go earlier, whatever. So when he showed up at the funeral home, I knew he was really sick. He had a very high fever. And I told him, I said, Jared, just sit down and let me know how you're doing, and you could leave at any given time. And, oh, yeah, Mom, yeah, Mom. Well, to make a long story short, eventually I saw him sitting in the chair up against the wall, and he really did not look good, and I touched him and he was burning up. I said, Jeremy, you have to go. You have to go to the doctor now. So I called his dad. I told him I was going to be sending him home with my oldest son, Jeffrey, to get him to the doctor. So that's what happened. And I, stayed back with the other kids. And about an hour after they left, I got a phone call, but I didn't answer it. I think because I was in the middle of speaking to someone, whatever, and after that I checked it because there was voicemail, and it was from my ex-husband, and he said that he had taken Jeremy to the doctor and he was hallucinating, and they sent him via ambulance to Children's Hospital, and I needed to come right away. Wow. So Paul and I leave. I get there. They're really concerned about his temperature because it's 104.7, and yeah, he's not answering questions correctly or anything like that. They're trying to figure out if it's an infection or, what's going on. They ended up giving him a spinal tap because they thought he could have meningitis, and we found out pretty quickly he didn't. They ended up doing a CAT scan. You see, because Jer had a really, really bad headache, and he was prone to headaches. He had them off and on throughout school, and they thought maybe something's going on up there, so they did a CAT scan, and then when the results came back, they told us he had a tumor, and it was blocking the flow of the fluid in his head, causing hydrocephalitis, and that's why his head hurt so bad. And they wanted to do surgery to they couldn't get rid of the tumor, but they were going to make a different pathway for the fluid to go through, and then so that pressure would go down. And I mean, you could have knocked me over with a feather. And the doctor must have saw my face, and she quickly said, I see the word tumors really bothered you. A lot of times we call them a lesion. He doesn't have cancer, blah, blah, blah. Well, they were going to give him surgery that night. And Jeremy was only 13. He had just turned 13. And he was so brave and such a good kid. But that night he laid there and he tried so hard not to cry. But he had tears, going down the sides of his face. And he said, Mom, I'm afraid. He says, I don't want to die. And I didn't want to die either. And I didn't cry. It took everything I had not to. I told him, Jerry, you're not going to die. I'm telling you that right now. You'll be all right. By the grace of God, he was. They couldn't make that pathway. The fluid was too cloudy. They couldn't see. And And so Jeremy ended up in the hospital for about a month. And he ended up with 3 different surgeries because they kept trying to make the pathway and they couldn't. So eventually they put a shunt in. And he still has that shunt to this day. He's now 24, and he still has that tumor or lesion. And they say if it ever grows, that's when it becomes cancerous. And it's in his brainstem. It's in a certain area where it's very difficult to ever do any kind of surgery. But then I hear that it's so slow growing, and sometimes they don't grow at all. So I mean, it's been a while, and I'm ever so grateful. So grateful. So yeah, it's been rough with that. And while Jared was in the hospital, a lot of stuff was going on at home. I spent the first couple of nights with him, but after that, I had to take care of the other kids. You know, I'd go home and spend the night at home and get up in the morning and, you know, send the kids off to school, which was really Michael and Brianna. The other ones were older by now. And go to the hospital. And then when Paul came home, he would make them supper and help them with homework and stuff like that. But like almost immediately, the first day he came home, and the whole basement was flooded. And it turned out the water heater broke. So he had to go get a new water heater and install that and all of that kind of stuff. But then 2 more times that week, the basement flooded. Only this time it was like sewer water, because we eventually found out there were roots in the lines and they all had to be cut out, and it was just a horrible mess. I felt so bad for him, and he was trying to come to the hospital to visit with Jer, because at that time, like I said, swine flu was going around, so they had the hospital basically on lockdown. The only people that were allowed to come and visit were parents and grandparents, and Jeremy was really starting, you know, to get depressed because he couldn't see anyone. And I really wanted him to see my son Jacob, because Jacob did come back for the funeral, but he was only going to be there a couple weeks, and then he was going to be going to Afghanistan too, and they wouldn't let him up. But it was probably the day before Jacob had to leave that they said he could come. And so that was wonderful. And so he got to spend time with him and my oldest son Jeff, and that was good. It put a smile on Jared's face. And so we were going through other extended family difficulties at this time. There was just so much going on, you know, with my dad and just other family members. And so when the boys were deployed, this was 2009, Jason luckily could call me every week without fail. He had access to a satellite phone. He was at Camp Leatherneck, and Jacob, I can't remember the name of the camp he was at, but I want to say, I think he said it was like 150 miles away from Camp Leatherneck. But he would occasionally go to Camp Leatherneck, where Jason was, to get supplies and stuff like that. And then he could call me. But I usually got letters from Jacob. Joe in Iraq, oh geez, I want to say the whole time he was gone, maybe I got 2 phone calls, maybe 3, and they were very short. I think he sent me 2 letters, maybe 3. Those weren't very long either. And so, you know, I just sent out a bunch of care packages and did the best that I could. trying to take care of Jer. He had to go through physical therapy and stuff because he had been in the bed for so long, and the head of the bed had to be elevated, otherwise the fluid would build up and make his head hurt really bad. So it messed up his legs, so he had to go. So we did that. I actually got a part-time job at a bakery, but then at like 5:30 in the morning on September 9th, my phone started ringing, my cell phone. That was very unusual. So I always knew if it was one of the kids overseas based on what the phone number looked like. If Joey called, if it was from Iraq, it would show up as only 3 digits on my phone. But if it was from Afghanistan, it would show up as 4. And it showed up as 4. And I'm thinking, why would they call me now? Nobody ever calls me at this time. I'm trying to figure out, time change in my head and whatever, but I answered the phone acting totally normal, this and that. And it was Jason. Only it barely sounded like Jason. It was really messed up. And what's going on, honey, this and that. Well, now Jason wasn't in infantry or anything. None of my sons were. Jason, I'm not really sure what his job was, but I know he was trained to he did radios, like land-to-air radios and stuff. But a few weeks earlier, he had told me that at Camp Leatherneck, they rotate security duty. So it didn't matter where you were, like what your job was, eventually you'd have to do it, and his time was coming up. And I said, Jason, I mean, why? That's not your job, you're not, and he said, oh Mom, it'll be fine. Well, it wasn't fine. So apparently they let like 50 to 100 civilians on base every day. They do jobs or sell stuff or whatever. So security checks them, their vehicles, all their stuff before they're allowed on base. And that's what Jason was doing in his truck or whatever when this guy let off a bomb. He was a suicide bomber, and it hit Jason. It hit quite a few people. But with Jason, it went down the whole right side of his body. And I was just I was freaking out on the inside. I'm like, what are you saying? And this and that. And then some commanding officer or whoever, I don't know. I heard from a lot of different people that day. And a colonel, and everybody's telling me how brave my son was and what he did was awesome. And so basically when this bomb went off, Jason was knocked to the ground, like quite a few people, and apparently he immediately got back up, put his gun in the truck or whatnot, and started helping all the wounded. And this was the first ever attack on Camp Leatherneck. And you know what? National Geographic was out there while Jason was out there. And I don't remember if that was before or after he got hit. But we watched it on TV. And I think if I can find a link, I'll put it in there. He was Jason Huber. So anyhow, they're like, oh, anything you want or need, we'll be there, and this and that. And I'm like, I said, you need to find his brother Jacob. And lo and behold, through God's great wisdom, Jacob was already there. He had been there picking up supplies for his camp And that's exactly what they did. They got Jacob right away and had him by Jason's side. Isn't that incredible? Isn't that wonderful? And so I didn't trust a word out of the Army's mouth, because Paul was Army for like 10 years. And yeah, a lot of what they tell you or you see on TV and this and that, it's not necessarily the case. So anyhow, I said, you know what? Oh, this wasn't Army, it was Marines, but still. So I said, you know what? You have my son Jacob call me. Okay, I want to talk to Jacob. And so eventually Jacob did call, and I said, Jacob, do not lie to me. Tell me the truth. How bad is Jason? And he says, Mom, he's really not that bad. You know, his leg got the worst. It's mostly his knee and this and that. And I'm like, okay. And so in the long run, Jason's knee is still kind of messed up, but not where he's disabled or, you know, he can't walk or anything like that. He came home whole. They all did. And I was just so very grateful. But my testimony about God is, how did I get through this? How? People ask me that all the time, and at first I'm just like, I don't know. I don't know. Jeremy being in the hospital, I think, was the worst, because I at first didn't know if he was going to die or not, or if he had cancer. I couldn't mourn my mom, and I couldn't really have people there with me. I was alone. And I was sitting there with my ex-husband, who was taking me to court for custody of Jeremy. I didn't even know what to do. I would go outside and sit in my car and just cry. And pray. I didn't ask why, because these things happen to people. They don't always happen to somebody else. And so I just asked for help. I said, please, Lord, please get me through this somehow, some way. Please don't let my son die. Please don't let my other sons die. It was a horrible, horrible year. I wouldn't wish it on anyone. But there were always little rays of sunshine. You know, God did send help. One time I was going to walk outside, heading to my car, and my sister and brother-in-law showed up. Here they pull up in their car. Come on, we'll sit with you. And she brought a big thermos of coffee, and they had snacks, and it was really nice, really nice. I didn't have to be by myself, and you know, got to talk about other stuff and laugh a little bit. And then when they lifted the visitation stuff, she made sure to come up to see Jer, you know, so he wasn't so alone. And then some of his friends came, and Jer was a huge skateboarder. He was in a lot of competitions, and his favorite skate park, the owner sent a custom skateboard signed by all these people and stuff for him. And so that really helped. And the kids, Michael and Brianna, they really kept me grounded. They helped to not have me focused on the doom and gloom all the time. They were the future. I was looking at them. They were still here. They still had lives. They They were still growing up, and they needed me. I was still a mom to them too, and they were affected by all of this too. And so I was happy to be able to be their mom and be there and take care of them, because it took my eyes off of myself. And that can be the problem a lot of the time when we're going through some real hardships. We tend to turn inward. But sometimes in order to get out of that, you have to go out. You have to look at someone else or somewhere else. You have to pray and believe that God will answer your prayer. May not answer it the way you thought, but He will. Paul was just everything. He was my rock. Without Paul, oh boy. He was just always there whenever I needed something done or picked up, or just, he was so thoughtful, doing things for Jer, bringing stuff for Jer and for me, and, trying to do stuff with Michael and Brianna, and all the work he had. It was just incredible what he did. And praise God. Praise God. God was always there. He felt what I felt. He cried when I cried. He was with me, and I knew it. I may have felt alone from people at times, but I always knew He was there. The year ended a whole lot better than it started. And in 2010, all the boys came home. And I was thrilled. And we had parties, and it was wonderful. And life went on. I'll never forget those days, and I'll never look back on them fondly, but I'll always remember who I had in my corner. I hope you can find Him in your corner as well. If you don't know Jesus as your own personal Savior, I really encourage you to do that. Your life will change. You'll never be alone. He'll change everything for the better, no matter who you are or what you've done. Doesn't matter. He'll always be there for you. Look in the description box. I'm going to put a link there to help you if that's something you're interested in. And I really hope it is. Anyhow, thanks for taking the time to watch this. I know it was very long. I'm sorry. But I hope, if someone could identify it and it helps them out, then it was worth it, right? Totally worth it. Share. Leave me a comment. Let me know what you've been through, how God helped you, some messed up time in your life that you managed to live through. We'd all like to hear it. We should all share some of this, So anyhow, it was nice talking to you. And you take care.